Hey guys, welcome to my studio. My name is Sarah Yeoman, and for this workshop, I'm going to be painting some sweet peas in a vase, a pink vase. Here's the drawing that I did, and you're welcome to draw this and paint along with me. Really happy you could join me here. I plan to be sharing a lot more videos here and then also videos on my website. So the pigments I'm going to use for the flowers, yellow ochre, some permanent rose, and any of these you can use any other color, any other substitute. You do not have to use the colors that I do. Alizarin crimson, cobalt violet, cobalt blue, cerulean blue, lavender, cobalt turquoise, and Jaune Brilliant #1, which is a Holbein color. I will be painting on arches, 140-pound cold press. And I am working on an angle. I have a wooden block. Well, there you go. There's the wooden block under my board. I use regular masking tape to tape down my paper. And I'll talk about my process as I go. I'm using an Escoda brush tonight. Most of the brushes will be Escoda. This is probably a Versatile, #12. I start off with a little bit of permanent rose, laying it right down onto dry paper. I work from the top to the bottom, working on an angle. Little cobalt violet, and with that brush, I take it right next to the damp edge of the pigment that I just laid down. And as I'm doing this, I'm not thinking about painting individual flowers. I'm just trying to get a variety of shapes in there, variety of color. And I am putting my foliage in as I go. And I'm mixing my foliage with a little bit of cerulean blue and some yellow ochre. I like to put the foliage in as I go because then it feels like it's connected to the form as opposed to having it look like it's been laid on separately. Again, using water to soften an edge. That was a little bit of cadmium red. And here and there, taking pigment, applying it with a little less water, a little more paint in the mixture. The ratio is a little stronger. And that's how you get the darker colors or the stronger pigments. And then you can add a little water and turn that into a lighter value. Again, softening an edge with a little bit of water. And again, the paper is dry. I did not wet the paper ahead of time here. So I'm working wet onto dry. And water in the brush and softening an edge. I use a paper towel to take the excess water out, and then if I'm lifting an edge, I'll take the paint that I've just lifted up off the paper and put it onto my paper towel. Back to a little bit of permanent rose, a little lavender mixed together. And you don't have to rush when you paint like this. There's no, we don't have to worry about, edges getting too hard because we're just doing one shape next to another, one color next to another. And this is just the first application, which allows us to really just to play. We know we can always go back and add more value in the second wash. And a little more foliage. I'm now using my Escoda, the Prado, or the Perla, excuse me, Perla. These are their synthetic line, and this has a really nice point. I think this is probably a number 6 or a number 8. Again, it's the Perla. I have one in every size, and it's great for making those nice calligraphy lines for the foliage. And I'm using the photo as a reference. I'm not copying it exactly. I do had my drawing there, but I never mind, not using the drawing and putting things in that I've not drawn, especially with the foliage. And a little more of that mixture there, which was like, I think that was the permanent rose with a little bit of cadmium red. I did just grab a little bit of alizarin crimson. Most of my pigments are Winsor Newton. I do use a couple of Daniel Smith and a couple of Holbeins, but mostly Winsor Newton. Again, water softening that edge just with a little bit of a damp brush. It can give such a sense of volume if you soften an edge on a form. And you don't want to soften every edge necessarily, but you don't want every edge to be hard. There's a little bit of a purple there next to that red. Again, just suggesting these sweet peas. They're such a lovely, delicate flower. They're almost like tissue paper. There's a little lavender and a little cobalt blue together. So shifting my ratio of pigment to water in with these colors and with these shapes. So sometimes there's a little less water, which makes for a stronger color. So that purple has less water in it in the darkest area, and then I use water to lighten that purple. And some more foliage. Again, mostly using yellow ochre and cerulean blue. I'll also use yellow ochre and cobalt blue if I want to be able to make it a little bit darker or just to shift the color a little bit. Sometimes I'll throw a little bit of cad yellow in, like I'm doing now, just to get a green that pops a little more. And a little more green again. And again, the point of that Escoda brush is so great to get those finer lines. And for me, it is most effective when I'm doing these florals to add the foliage as I'm doing my flowers as opposed to putting it on afterwards. And a little more purple. And notice that I don't always hold my brush the same way, and I will turn my wrist in order to make a different mark. I usually always stand when I paint, so I really do use my whole arm when I paint. And I am a lefty, so my palette is on my left-hand side. If you're a righty, yours would be on your right-hand side. Connecting shapes, little permanent rows there. Make that a little punchier. Shifting my color ever so slightly for each flower. Sweet peas are they're like a hothouse flower. They grow them locally around me in a greenhouse. So I love to go and buy them and put them in the studio for my students to paint and for me to paint because I love them. And a little more foliage again, yellow ochre, cerulean blue. Soften an edge, add a little water to an edge. Let there be a little bit of ambiguity in a form. We don't have to say everything about each shape. We're just hinting at the form. And the mass, we're thinking of it as a three-dimensional form and trying to suggest that with as little detail as possible. Still using my same Escoda brush. And then a much stronger alizarin color. Again, just for variety, just for something with a little more punch to it. It does get darker over on that right side. It's a little less in the light. And there also happens to be more of the dark red and burgundy, red violet flowers over on the right side. Again, a little bit of alizarin in this mixture. Even pushing it a little darker with some ultramarine blue in that mixture. Trying to shift the color each time I touch the paper just a bit. Always thinking about positive space, but also the negative space. What does the shape look like on the outside of the form? And what does it look like on the outside of the whole flower arrangement? Trying to think about those edges as well as the forms themselves, as well as the positive shapes. A little more red in there next to the pink. And again, I'm working on Arches 140-pound cold press. It's my normal paper. I also will use the Saunders Waterford, the St. Cuthbert's mill. I like that paper a lot. It's a little softer. Um, I like the Arches because you can kind of beat it up a lot. And you can do a lot of lifting and spraying. I do use Fabriano as well. So always try to use good paper, even if you're just a beginner. You're going to learn so much faster by using quality products. You're going to be 50% better that much faster. So don't skimp on materials. Buy good paint and good paper. You don't have to spend a lot on brushes anymore. The Escoda products are fantastic. Rosemary and Company makes some really beautiful watercolor brushes. They're a UK company, but the shipping is very affordable. I've also been using some really wonderful Holbein brushes. and a little bit of a stronger magenta color. And again, you don't have to use the same colors that I do. You could use magentas out of a tube for this exercise, like a permanent magenta, magenta, or quinacridone rose, quinacridone violet. Scarlet Lake would be a beautiful color. It doesn't, the colors don't really matter. It's whatever colors that you enjoy and that you're familiar with. This was originally a workshop that I did as a Zoom class with the Lake Placid Center for the Arts. And it also had a whole second demo of another sweet pea painting, but it broke this up into a 1 hour segment. If you're interested in taking online classes with me, you can go to the Lake Placid Center for the Arts website, or you can go to my website and see my upcoming classes. I have one coming up in the middle of January, but I will be including a lot more free classes, workshops on my YouTube channel. So I hope you'll subscribe and tune in and check back. I'm going to try to share something once a week, a free video. And there you go. When in doubt, just splatter a little bit. I love just getting unexpected texture just by splattering, throwing some paint at the paper. And again, a nice strong red over on that side. Cad red. And I added a little bit of ultramarine blue to that. Again, to push it into a deeper value. And you see one color next to another exactly as you see it, right next to that damp edge, moving down the page. I try not to jump around too much in the flowers. I always want to connect, connect, connect. That way I don't get too lost. And I have a spray bottle, so I just sprayed that with my little Holbein atomizer. Sometimes it's nice to just dampen everything up a little bit so the paint can run a little bit and meet its neighbor and soften up maybe. It just adds a little more light back into the pigment and lets it move and breathe a bit. And some lighter purples in there, a little bit of lavender. And a darker purple. And you can buy purple in a tube. There's dioxazine purple or mineral violet or imperial purple, but you can also just mix your purples. It's best to get to know the pigments that are on your palette and learn what you can mix with them as opposed to going out and buying new colors all the time, because then you never really get to understand how to mix color, and that is so important. If you're a beginner, I would say maybe have 6 or 7 colors and just learn what they can do. You don't have to have purples, you don't have to have greens, you don't have to have oranges, because you can make all those colors from the primaries. And a little more foliage in there. And I always try to vary the foliage, so often when we're creating foliage, we make a leaf or we make a line and we like it so much that we'll repeat that same shape over and over and over again. So often you'll have your leaves all are the same size and are all going in the same direction. So I always try to give it a little bit of variety. I try not to think about painting leaves or painting stems. I'm just mark making. I'm just doing calligraphy. So almost done with these flowers. And you got to splatter a little more paint. And we're going to be moving on to the vase in just a moment. And I'll give you a list. And here's the colors that we're going to be using for our vase. Cobalt violet, the Jean Brilliant #1, which is a Holbein color again. Cerulean, turquoise, and cobalt blue. And what I'm going to do a little differently here is I'm going to put water on the vase shape to start clean water. And I'm using, again, my larger Escoda brush. This is the Versatile, I think, or the Prado, Prado. I'm not sure which one it is. Um, so I'm just wetting it, clean water, and it just makes it so much easier to get the paint on there in a nice smooth fashion when you do use water ahead of time. And one painting can have lots of different methods. So you can have the direct paint that we did with our flowers, and then you can use a wet and wet for your vase shape. And it's not dripping wet, it's just enough water on there that when I go to put paint on there, it's going to go on nice and easy. So that's a mixture of permanent rose and lavender. And look how nicely that goes on. You don't have to worry about a hard edge because we already have the paints are only going to go where it's already wet. And it's not going to drip because I'm not using that wet of pigment because there's already water on the page. So again, that same mixture, permanent rose and lavender. And that's the Jean Brilliant #1. It's a very sort of creamy pigment. I took that and I mixed a little bit of the cobalt violet with it. Look at that nice creamy light color. It almost has the feel of ceramic. And it is considered an opaque color, but don't be afraid of opaque pigments. That you can use them in a very transparent way. Opaques have such a bad name, but they're really amazing when you learn how to paint with them, and they're very versatile. So it's so easy when you wet that base ahead of time to just get that base layer in there very quickly. And now, again, I can take my round brush, start to mix some stronger paints, and start painting some of the shadow shapes on that right-hand side. Again, working wet into wet. And I don't get hard edges because the paper is damp. So and a little warmer, so a little more red in that as I move towards the left. Little Jaune Brilliant back in there. A little cobalt, a little cerulean in that mixture. And you can see there's not a lot of water in the mixture on the palette because we already have water on the page. Again, started with the lights and are moving towards the darker values on the vase, sneaking up on it. Little cad red in there. Some lavender. Back to a little of the cad red. Right into that same mixture. Just pushing it in a little bit of a warmer direction. I'm just letting the paint move a little bit down the page a bit. Sometimes I just turn it upside down so it'll drip the direction that I want it to drip. And now I have a 3/4 inch flat brush, and I'm going to show you how I now can go in and sculpt the shape. I'm lifting back into there and pulling the highlights off and shaping the vase the way I want to. Again, it's a flat watercolor brush, and as I lift, I take the paint out of the brush and put it into the paper towel. And it's really easy to lift when the paper is damp like that. So again, almost sculpting the form with the flat brush. And then I can go and put paint right back on top of that. Pushing it a little warmer. And I've got that nice highlight that I wanted on that uh, edge of the vase there. Finding a little bit more dark. A little cerulean, a little cobalt in there to make that value a little stronger. And it's still damp in there, so the paint goes on nice and easy. And pulling out that flat brush again, getting the shape I want. Adding that little highlight. Adding the highlight on that rim. A little cerulean in the brush. And a little turquoise in there with that cerulean. The handles have a little teeny bit of a turquoisey green color on them, so I wanted to get a little bit of that in. Goes right over the pink. And lifting a highlight. Well, that's looking pretty good. So now we are just going to finish up a couple of these edges, clean up a couple edges, clean up that bottom edge. It's still damp, so that flat brush allows me to do that. Reshape something, soften an edge. Yeah, I'm pleased with that. That looks good. So now we're going to work on our background. We're going to use the Jean Brilliant #1. Oh, that went very quickly. I'll talk about it as I go. Um, that was the first time I painted this. It was just a print that I did. I'm going to use lavender. I'm going to use some Jean Brilliant #1. So I'm actually going to use a lot of opaques for this background. And I'm using a little bit of a bigger mop brush, probably like a 16. And the paper is still the paint is still a little bit damp. The flowers are a little damp. The vase is a teeny bit damp. That's okay. I'm gonna come in. I'm going into my Jean Brilliant #1, trying to get my palette clean here. Um, so big mop brush, and I'm just putting a light layer of that Jean Brilliant #1. So I'm wetting the background, right? I'm gonna make it as a wet and wet, but I'm wetting it with a color. So I'm putting that kind of creamy Jean Brilliant #1, again, that Holbein color on there, just smushing it in there. Not too worried about where it goes. Not a ton of water in there, but trying to get it everywhere around those flowers, because that's what I'm going to work back into this, the Jean Brilliant, and add texture and add other colors into it. So again, starting with my lightest light, which is the Jean Brilliant #1. And I'm using the biggest brush I can, so if you have a large area to cover, grab a big brush. And that's a little bit of lavender, a little bit of cobalt violet, and I'm just putting that right into that Jean Brilliant. So I'm kind of floating it into that wet surface right over top, and it makes a beautiful smoky pinky gray. Teeny bit of the turquoise, right, again, right into that same mixture. So it's a little bit of a greenish color, smoky green, which plays almost like a little minty green, plays nicely with the pinks and the reds and the purples. And a little lavender into that mixture. So it's a very delicate background, but I love putting on that Jean Brilliant #1 or any kind of warm opaque underpainting, and then putting pigment back on top of that. It really creates a nice effect. A little more lavender in the mixture. Lavender and the Jean Brilliant together. Right up to those edges. Again, just taking water and splattering it with my fingers to get a little bit of texture back into that background. And you can do a spray bottle to do that, but sometimes the larger drops from your hands makes larger shapes, bigger shapes. And that's what I want, is that some interesting texture back in there. So intentional blooms. And then just splattering directly on there with a brush with some of I think that's some of the Jean Brilliant that's on my brush. softening that edge with a little bit of water. And more lavender and some cobalt violet. Just trying to make a little deeper, smokier purple, just to suggest it's a little darker on that right-hand side in the background. Again, a little more variety in the background, so lighter on one side and darker on the other. Just a slight bit. And I use neutral tint to deepen that color. And it's really easy to just work it right into that surface because it's still damp in there. It's not super wet, it's just wet enough that you can smush a little pigment in there. I'm going to hint at a little bit of a shadow shape. So our light is coming from the left-hand side, so there would be a shadow on that lower right. So I wet the area where I was going to put the shadow shape in first and then dropping the paint into it so you get nice soft edges. And a little cerulean into that mixture. Again, a little bit of a smoky green. Put a little yellow ochre into that green mixture and cerulean. Fixing that one little spot in there, suggesting a little foliage. So wrapping this up now, so I hope you enjoyed this sweet pea demo. Again, look for some more free videos here on YouTube, and then I'm also going to have some paid instruction on my website, and I do the workshops with the Lake Placid Center for the Arts. So thanks for joining me. Please subscribe to my channel, and happy painting, my friends.